Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the show. Thank you very much for being here. This is episode 32, and today we are going to be talking about Burgergate and climate change. And my guest is going to be Dr. Vasile Stanescu. I first heard him speak at Stanford a few years ago, and I was tremendously impressed with his depth of analysis and the breadth he brings to looking at every aspect of animal agriculture and what we do to animals. And of course, since then, it's been the same, and he's been just continuing along. And I think he's one of those people that I'm glad that he's on our side. I'm glad he's not working for the animal agriculture industry. And I'm sure the animal agriculture industry is very upset with him. So welcome, Dr. Stanescu. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for those kind words.
Yeah. Tell us, how did you get started in this field? What made you look into this?
Well, I went vegetarian when I was 9 years old.
Oh.
I actually checked out Peter Singer's Animal Liberation from my local library at the age of 9, precociously. Was completely convinced by the argument and stopped eating meat at the age of 9. Both of my parents ate meat. My father's passed away, but my mother still eats meat. They've eaten meat their whole lives. It's interesting because he thinks like these arguments are very complicated, but I've always thought anyone can figure them out. A 9-year-old child can figure them out. Right. And then I went vegan while I was in college. And then in graduate school, I focused on this as my academic work. Yes.
So your academic work was on environmental health and animal studies?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. The intersection of environmentalism, particularly climate change, and also species extinction and animal agriculture.
Right. So you did your PhD at Stanford, or was that your postdoc?
Yes. Okay. Yes. No, I did my PhD at Stanford. The program is something called Modern Thought and Literature. So it's a very odd sounding name, but in essence, it's rhetoric or communication. And one of the things I try to highlight is questions around animal studies have been dominated by philosophy, analytic philosophy. And I think that's great, but we've actually won the arguments. There are no arguments left. The arguments Peter Singer gave me that convinced me when I was 9 have not somehow been defeated. I was just in a group of analytic philosophers about animal studies, and they were like, what are the new arguments? And so I think incorrectly we think, well, if we just beat the argument now, we'll win. But we've already won all the arguments.
Right.
We have to move on to questions of communication, questions of public relations, questions of how and why are people still eating meat, not just from an analytic reason, but something that like gets deeper, their whole person. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So how would we frame that? In the current environment that we are in, what would be the most effective way for all of us to communicate to the public?
I mean, so I have some opinions. Maybe they're wrong. I don't know. But a few things I believe is, one, I think that we have done a poor job of framing it thus far. I think that we've done a poor job framing it in a few ways. One, I think that we have alienated virtually everyone who might be sympathetic. We have done things like PETA using people dressed in Klan outfits to protest dog breeding. Of course, I'm opposed to dog breeding, but that's a pretty effective way to make sure it is difficult to build coalitions with African Americans. We've used tropes around sexism. We've used tropes around ableism. We've used tropes around transphobia. Again and again and again, we seem to do everything we can to alienate potential allies. And we seem to focus on a few consumerist options as the primary thing we talk about and focus on and fund, none of which I think will work. So what I've been arguing is that instead we should focus on veganism not as a diet, not as a lifestyle choice, not as a consumerist option, but as a fundamental social justice movement build coalition of other people to make real change. And in particular, and I know this goes to your passion as well, around the environment and the current crisis that we're in and the short period of time we have to make real change.
Absolutely, absolutely. So in that context, I was shocked at the reaction to the Burgergate that happened recently. When uh, people are protesting on the Democratic side, they're protesting, "Oh, we're not going to take away your hamburgers, right?
Right.
Your hamburgers are sacrosanct." So you ask, when are they going to get serious? And who is going to get serious about addressing this issue? And so how do we cut through that? It seems like periodically the industry makes.
I'm sorry, you froze just for a second, so I can't hear you now.
Both sides come. Okay. So periodically, it seems to me that the industry makes everyone, sides, come and reflect at the end of the and say, "We never ever shut you down." How do we get through that? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. And so I think if I heard the question correctly, yes, about Burgergate, and this moment where Joe Biden was accused, or the Democrat Party was accused of doing something substantial about the environmental effects of meat eating. And the response is, how absurd, fake news, we would never do that. And it was such a truly disheartening moment where those were the two sides, the Republicans accusing the Democrats of caring about animals or the environment, and the Democrats being absurd. We'd never address that issue. So I think a couple of things are going on. One, I think strongly that we have to become political. I think loss that we've had as a movement is focusing too much on individual consumers' choices. I am strictly vegan, so I don't even consume processed sugar because of worries of bone char. So I follow all of that, but that is not my focus when I deal with other people. So the way I refer to it is the 2% less. You look on the back of the package and it says 2% less and it's some animal products. Whatever people want to do or not do in that area, fundamentally, in some sense, it doesn't matter because none of us can be purely vegan in the life that we currently live. We all know this. It's in Band-Aids, it's in vaccines, probably the vaccines that we had to get from COVID, it's in tires. So trying to I'm more pure than you is a losing game. What I do believe is that we need real political action, and we have to have it in a short period of time. And so as a movement, we have not been focused on policy. Why can vegans not become the new NRA? Why can we not be strong single issue voters around issues around animals and the environment and use our collective weight? I mean, there's actually quite a lot of vegetarians and vegans in the United States. It's somewhere around 9 to 12% of the population. I mean, that's comparable to the number of African Americans in the United States. So why can we not use our real significant political weight to push for legislative changes and to really change policy? And that is what I strongly think we need to do.
So, but do you think policy change to solve the environment? Are we looking at complete transformation? And if it's a system transformation, how do we achieve that? Right? Is it through incrementalism? Do you think?
So I do believe that the environment gives us an opening to build coalitions and to create change. The science is very clear. To deny the role of animal agriculture on the environment is to be as much of a climate denier as someone who denies all the science on the environment in general. So while Biden or the Democrats may say, well, we are not going to do anything with that, the very reason the Republicans are making this claim is because all the evidence shows we in fact have to, particularly beef. There's simply no question there's no way for us to reach the Paris Climate Accords, for example, if we don't substantially decrease the amount of meat consumption within the United States, which is not decreasing, but it's actually steadily increasing and is projected to double. So I think that gives us an open in terms of policy. And there's a few different policy routes we can go. So I'm policy agnostic. Different people can work on different goals at the same time. We can end the massive government subsidies that produce the cheap meat that happen at every level. And it's not just on the final product. So they provide the feed. Corn is grown at a loss for every farmer that grows it. That money comes from the government. That's what makes factory farms possible at all. The penalties are minimal that are done by the APA and generally are not enforced. So every CAFO, confined animal feeding operation out there, violates a host of laws, and they just pay the fines as an operating business cost. So if we actually enforced real fines, environmental fines, we don't need new laws. We just actually enforce the current laws. Every CAFO goes out of business. They're not economically feasible. The labor laws are misused. The CAFOs recruit undocumented labor. They send out flyers. We have these flyers to various countries. They ship in the workforce. They keep them in extremely exploitive conditions. They pay for the housing. They work at the CAFO. Whenever they try to get better working conditions, then the CAFO calls ICE, the Immigration Service, and comes and deports them. That's actually government aid to break up their unions. And he doesn't fine them for having violated all these labor laws. So the level of government support that goes in to make factory farms and CAFOs possible is overwhelming. We think they're so strong. They are so weak. It is a completely unsustainable business model on multiple levels. It's like nuclear power. Nuclear power could never exist without massive government aid. CAFOs cannot exist without massive government aid. If we just stop the government aid, they go out of business overnight. And they're quite worried. Tyson gets this. Tyson spends more as a percentage of their income than Exxon, than Chevron, than versus anyone on public relations and lobbying, because they actually get how much they need constant government aid.
Right.
And so Nation Rising and a few other organizations are like, let's just stop this. Let's just stop giving money. Let's make the farm bill a political issue. Let's stop giving massive amounts of aid to meat and animal agriculture in the United States. If we do just that, virtually all animal production in the United States goes out of business.
Right.
So I would start there. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. So the question then is, when that goes out of business, clearly you are absolutely right. Without government support, this entire enterprise is going to just collapse. The killing machine is going to collapse. But when that happens, there are ramifications throughout the economic sector. Throughout. It's not just that industry collapses, but the healthcare industry will collapse as well, because they depend on people getting sick in order to make money off of them. So we have this exploitative system that is fundamentally preying on people. We are all being factory farmed. That's the way I put it. Everybody is being factory farmed. And even the ones who are running the factory are part of this machine, and they don't know how to get off it. So they're kind of stuck too. Like Rousseau said, right? He who's a master of others is more a slave than they. So do we not have a responsibility to figure out an alternate so that people can come and join that, as a vegan movement? You say this is how you would organize in a compassionate society. What do you think about that?
I do agree with you. I am also opposed to the capitalist system. I'm opposed to the capitalist system for a variety of reasons, but one of which is I think it's inherently unvegan. So if you say at core, what is it that we are arguing when we argue for animal rights? Well, somebody like Peter Singer, Animal Liberation, even though it did convince me at the age of 9, he's just working about the worst kinds of abuses, torture. Of course, torture is wrong. We shouldn't torture people. But I would say it's more than that. Even if an animal is well treated, it is fundamentally wrong for one person to own another person.
Right.
And so I would say at some level, capitalism actually is about a kind of ownership of a group of people over another group of people, even if they want to pretend that it's not the case. And we can see that now when they're complaining, oh, no one wants to work for wages that are unlivable, and are trying to change unemployment benefits to force people to work. You have to work at terrible jobs, indeed jobs that exploit animals for the most part, fast food, for example, or die. And so, yes, I think that we need deep fundamental change. And one of my problems with consumerist models of veganism is, in my mind, it kind of gives up the entire game. A deeply exploitive world with a vegan option is not the world I want or the world that I am fighting in. Yes.
Right. So you're also looking for a fundamental transformation in how we relate to each other, how we relate to animals, how we relate to the planet in general.
Yes, but unlike some people, I don't think it has to be an either or. I think we can fight, and you may disagree, but I think we can fight to end government subsidies for the CAFO system politically at the same time that we can organize in a host of different social justice issues to create widespread change. In my own life, I've not really found that to be contradictory.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree with you. In fact, I support the Agriculture Fairness Alliance here in the US. They are trying to lobby and get more political power, get politicians to actually do what they say.
Right, which is always difficult. Yes, but we had a vegan presidential candidate just run. The first time I think that we've had a vegan presidential candidate, Cory Booker, who had one of his issues on the platform, the ending of CAFOs. And it was interesting the sort of push it took to get other vegans interested or excited. And even if he wasn't the candidate that you supported and he had some issues which were problematic, he certainly was not anti-capitalist. I think having him on the stage, having that question came up is important. And he's now thinking through legislation with Elizabeth Warren that would, in essence, make factory farms legal. So I think these are helpful progresses. I'll say something else. The question isn't only factory farms. I am equally concerned about so-called humane meat, in vitro meat, all of that. So I don't want someone to listen and think, oh, well, Voss is just opposed to factory farms. He thinks the rest of this is great. It's not. But I think we can do even policy actions around those issues as well. There are ballot initiatives that are happening now that want to make it illegal to force animals to have sex that they don't want. If this happens, all animal husbandry ends overnight. And I love everything about this because it is now, if you just get enough signatures, you can get it on a ballot initiative. You can get it in California. You can get it in Colorado. You can use the same sort of method that we've seen for, say, the legalization of marijuana. That forces the industry to spend money and time and ads to explain to people why forcing animals to have sex they don't want is necessary for the industry to run. And I can't wait to see those ads. So this seems so hopeful, and why can't we do this? Why can't we just organize, get it on the ballot and see what happens? And that too is a legal legislative change. And that someone doesn't have to be a perfect vegan, but they can still go into that booth and vote to give every animal the right of refusal, which is a right we have in feminism and queer studies and so many social justice issues, and say they shouldn't have to have sex that they don't want. Well, all animal husbandry works on this. There is none that doesn't. The industry is illegal tomorrow. So.
That's beautiful. That's like a little key that you have.
I mean, my only point in this is that it's not somehow impossible or fanciful, because all the time I'm told, even by vegans, that I am unrealistic and utopian, because I think that we need to end all animal agriculture in our lifetime, quickly, now. We have 9 years to decrease global consumption of meat by 75% to meet the Paris climate goals. 9 years. And so it's like, no, we can do this. This is not magical. This isn't like we're going to spend our whole lives and at the end we were good people, but we didn't make a difference. This is possible. This is achievable. It is certainly not harder than other things other social justice issues have achieved, but they have all had a political goal that they called for. There is not one social justice issue or movement that had no political goals, no laws they want to pass. They've always said, we're fighting and we want the government to do this, and we're going to escalate till the government did this. And the thing was never enough. We still have anti-blackness, we still have discrimination, but it always mattered. And if you say, well, what is the political goal the animal rights movement is demanding? I could not tell you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's, I mean, I'm a little bit probably more extreme than you, because I'm insisting that it should be done in 5 years, not 9 years.
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, and the as Greta is clear to remind people, Greta Thunberg, the 9 years of 75% global meat consumption, or we don't get past the 1.5 degrees in Celsius, is a conservative goal, which gives us a 50% chance of avoiding truly apocalyptic impacts. Right. That is not good. A 50% chance of avoiding apocalyptic. And the United Nations is this very like stuffy organ. And when they use phrases like apocalypse, that's their phrase, apocalyptic impacts.
Right.
I mean, this went through rigorous peer review, and you go, okay, why? This is not overly scaring people. This is not using hydropoetic language. Like, this is probably conservative. So this is quite worrisome. So yes, 5 years would be great. But the urgency, that's the thing, because I've been vegetarian since I was 9, so many other vegetarians I talked to, we've been through so much. I'm 41 now, that's a long time. And we go, look, we do what we can. And even to vegans, what I want them to know is the urgency of what is happening now. A tipping point means you can't ever go back. That's what, we're passing them all the time. A species that goes extinct means the species is gone forever. We can't keep waiting, separate from all the animals that are dying and suffering each day. We can't keep waiting, saying, okay, the great change is going to happen later. We have to make the change now, quickly, massively.
Right. I absolutely agree. And in fact, I use the analogy of, driving a car at 90 miles an hour and rounding a bend in the road and seeing that some joker put a concrete wall on the road right in front of you. 5 seconds to impact.
Right.
Would you say, I love to drive my car 90 miles an hour, I love the feel of the wind in my hair and all this nonsense, or would you put your foot on the brake right away?
Right. I mean, that's the thing with doubling, with exponents, with tipping points. It's going to get steadily worse and then really bad quickly. And so things might seem troubling now, and then it's going to pass a point and it's going to spiral out of control.
Right. First project I worked on as an engineer, I was trained in, it was a non-circuit analysis. Why this circuit behave? Say it's, the output goes like this, and then suddenly it jumps up, right? So we call it the jump phenomenon.
Exactly.
My job was to analyze the jump phenomenon. Okay.
Exactly correct.
And I was looking at the temperature of climate, the way it's going up, and saying, I've seen this before. And I don't want it to get to the other side. I want to be pulling it back right now, because I know what happens. It's because sometimes you don't even know whether there is an endpoint there. It could keep going. The whole thing will melt.
Yes, right. It's true. It's true. I mean, during the Trump administration, we're trying to stop a global increase of 1.5 degrees to 2% for the Paris Climate Accords. The Trump administration was looking, what if we do? What if it goes up by 20 degrees? So it's somehow both an absolute crisis, and we have to do it now, and every step still matters. Like, no matter where we're at, yes, it could always be worse, and we don't really know what will happen. We don't know. The other bizarre thing that I try to highlight to people is we are living through climate change now. What is difficult for me to wrap my mind around is, I understand 1970s climate change seemed this distant thing. Scientists, do we believe scientists? Who knows? But people are suffering now, and they can't see it. I mean, that's truly distressing. People in Texas are living through climate change. That is what is causing it. And they're like, I don't know what's happening. Is climate change real? You lost power in your home. Your state was colder than Alaska, and you still don't know if climate change is real. What would it take? It's very, very concerning.
Well, you see, when I go, this is the thing, right? So if you ask someone in Texas, they would respond this way. But when I go to India,
Okay.
and I go talk to the poor villagers in India, and I was going to, talk to them about climate change. And they're saying, "Why are you telling us this? We already know."
Right. Right. Right.
and I mean, because for them, it's see they're on the receiving end of this colonial system,
Right.
right? They're the ones who are growing rice, and they're getting like 5 cents a pound for the rice they
Yes.
grow, and whereas we are paying $2 a pound here in the supermarket, so they're
Right.
getting shafted
Yeah.
for growing that rice. So they understand, and they're living with climate, on a daily basis because they don't have ACs in their huts, so they know, and they're saying. So but I asked them, why do you think this is happening? And their response was incredible. I mean, they went straight to the root cause. They said this is happening because God is angry with us because we cut down all the trees. You know, and I said, I mean, a villager in India has figured out something that people are having so much trouble figuring out. They have PhDs. And I'm telling them, what's part of this don't you understand? We cut 3 trillion trees on the planet. And you're telling me that has nothing to do with climate change? It's only fossil fuels. It's mind-boggling. Okay, the amount of the blinders we put on this particular aspect of our life, because we cut all those trees mainly to raise animals. See, when I worked with Professor Atul Jain at the University of Illinois on our paper that we wrote for the AGU, we looked at their models, and so the 37% of the land is grazing land, but on that land, we are only storing 2% of the land carbon. Okay, so if you bring that 2% up to 20%, you solve climate change. It's as simple as that. So I asked him, so is that grazing land? Was it always grazing land, or what happened to it? And so we looked up, and in 1800, 41% of that used to be forests. And we chopped it down, right, in the last 200 years. And so then if we bring back those forests, I asked him, so if we bring back those forests, how much carbon can we sequester? And we could sequester more carbon than we've added to the atmosphere since 1750.
There's a lot going on what you said. I mean, the first thing is, yes, the world's poor will be the ones disproportionately and vastly hurt by climate change. And I do think that there is some degree of complacency in the United States. There's a TikTok video that went viral where a guy says, "Am I worried about climate change? No, I have air conditioning."
Yeah. Right.
And there's something that's like so much that's in there. There's an argument, which I don't think is a completely fanciful argument, that even though they claim not to believe in climate change, some of the sort of conservative support of the wall is that they know that you can't destroy the entire world without mass migration, and you're either going to need a very big wall with probably armed with lots of guns to keep people out, or you're going to have some sort of global equity. I mean, we are going to have starvation, we're going to have mass migration, we're going to have parts of the world underwater, and it will be disproportionately the global poor who suffer. And that is a social justice issue of climate that is not discussed enough.
Right.
The second thing that you said, which is true, is that animal agriculture, the primary way in which it creates greenhouse gas emissions is via deforestation. And that is, as you point out, not widely understood. So free range farming, which some people who are concerned about the suffering of animals advocate for, I'm also concerned about the suffering of animals, is ill-advised, since CAFOs, as terrible as they are, take up less room per pound of meat. They are incredibly efficient at producing pounds of meat. So if you take an animal who's in a CAFO, gestation crate or what have you, and you allow that animal to have more room, i.e. they are free range, the only way to do that when you have approximately 70 billion land animals raised and killed each year for human consumption, is actually to cause more deforestation.
Exactly.
And so it is actually worse, and this is what virtually all peer-reviewed evidence has said. This is not one study, this is many studies. Worse in terms of climate change and species loss to convert from factory farms CAFOs to free range, humane, local, whichever term you want to use. Even CAFOs are. So that doesn't mean I'm for gay votes. I'm absolutely opposed to them, but it means it is completely misguided to try to argue for these so-called alternative forms of animal husbandry. They are
Right.
not sustainable on a global scale. They're less sustainable than the current system.
Right. 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 So that the deforestation aspect is not well understood, fundamentally because the IPCC arbitrarily chose to start measuring from 1750 onwards.
Mm.
They didn't look as to what happened until 1750. I mean, there is research. Okay, there is research out there, scientific research. Bill Rudiman, for instance, has done great work in this area, and he showed that actually we have been changing the climate for 10,000 years because we have been chopping trees for 10,000 years. And for the first 10,000 years, it was okay because we actually kept the temperature constant. If we hadn't been chopping trees, the temperature would have gone down and we would have gone back to another ice age 6,000 years ago. Okay. So actually, the temperature increase we caused by deforestation from animal agriculture in the first 10,000 years is greater than the temperature increase we have caused from fossil fuels for the last 200 years. Okay. So literally, if we all go vegan, if the world goes vegan and we bring back the forest that we cut, we can reverse climate change. We can bring the temperature back to where it was.
You make another excellent point, which is most studies just focus on not cutting down more trees. What they don't focus on is reforestation. And so if we both stopped cutting down more trees and then engaged in mass reforestation of the large amounts of land that were left, that were then made available when we stopped mass animal agriculture, then you could have a far greater impacts than virtually any study ever looks at. That is a completely true statement. That's exactly correct.
Right.
Yes. And people just don't, even though it's common sense, people don't think about how much land is used for animal agriculture, because if they live in a city, they may not see it. I mean, 70 billion land animals is approximately 10 times the entire human population. And it always is. As the population grows, the amount of animals we eat hovers somewhere around 10 times as much. So, all cities in the United States combined are somewhere around 1 to maybe 5% of total land use. Animal agriculture is something like a third of land use. So we're often very concerned about urbanization and growing of the cities. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but there's just nothing in terms of land use scale that accounts in terms of animal agriculture. There's nothing similar. It's the number one cause of deforestation in the Amazon. People will be very upset about cutting down the Amazon. Why is the Amazon being cut down? To make room for grazing for cattle, but it doesn't last long. And then they cut and burn more trees to create more room for grazing for the cattle. Sometimes to grow soybeans, but those soybeans are then shipped to CAFOs and fed to animals.
Right. Yeah.
These are just true statements. Yeah. I mean,
I wrote a paper on it. In fact, it finally got published. I had trouble getting people to even read it. The editor of Nature magazine wrote back to me saying that it's not of general interest. And I said, what are you talking about? I'm showing that animal agriculture is the leading cause of climate change, and you're saying it's not of general interest.
It has been an uphill battle. There has been pushback. I'm sure everyone has seen the sort of documentary that talks about the way that various nonprofits focused on climate change have been hostile to the issue of veganism. I think it has gotten better recently, but only very recently, and still not where it needs to be. I mean, it is unlikely for you to go to any web page of any environmental organization out there and have them clearly say you need to go vegan or massively decrease your meat consumption. I'd be shocked if that occurred. Even though if you were to ask them, they wouldn't disagree with the science. I mean, there isn't really another side. That's the other thing I try to highlight to people. It is not the case that you have, say, 5 studies for and 5 studies against, and who knows. It like climate change, it is virtually all the studies on one side and a couple of studies by paid researchers of the animal agriculture industry on the other side. A couple of contrarian scientists who are not even trained in climatology. They're like animal agricultural science, Frank Mittler, for example. That is the scenario. Right. 90% of the studies say, We can't. And many of the researchers are not vegetarian or vegan when they first start. They actually start perhaps to prove the other side. One of the best studies, Joseph Orr at the University of Oxford, he started because he believed in humane meat, and he wanted to do the research to prove that humane meat was a valid, scalable option, and to urge people to leave from CAFOs to eating humane meat. That was his goal. And when he actually looked at all the data, because he is a valid scientist, at the end, his conclusion was he had to go vegan, and he did go vegan. And he said, there is no evidence to suggest that humane meat is scalable. It is exactly the opposite. So there's not like some sort of bias interest. There isn't, unfortunately, there isn't some huge vegan conglomerate paying for studies. I wish it doesn't exist. It is actually people who are being data driven, looking at the numbers, listening to exactly the arguments you make, and realizing that they have to change their own behaviors. Yeah.
So, but it brings me to the systems side of it, because I'm a systems engineer.
Okay.
And so when I see something like this, I realize that there is the system is trying to stabilize itself, which is where all this, all the lying and the and the storytelling that comes in, because it's trying to stabilize itself, because it knows that it's that it's reached its peak, that it cannot go any further. You cannot keep growing the economy anymore. And yet it's one of those objectives of a sustainable development goals is to grow the economy even more. It's objective number 8, actually, goal number 8. And I've been telling the UN, saying we need to petition the UN to drop that goal, because who cares if some number is growing? If you met zero hunger and good health and well-being and all the other goals are met, who cares if some number is growing, right?
Right. Absolutely. So I hope this doesn't sound too theoretical, but there is a French theorist, his name is Lyotard, and he says, look, no one believes in meta-narratives anymore. And so meta-narratives is like, say, Christianity, or progress for progress sake, or knowledge for knowledge's sake. He's not saying no one, but dominant. There's not this dominant narrative. What we have left, though, is just the GDP. What do people believe in? Somehow the GDP itself becomes its own goal. It's not even the goal to help us or to make people happier. There's not a lot of evidence that's what's going on. Just the numbers themselves are the goal. The economy is doing well. The president's doing a great job. I just listen to NPR as I do every morning, and that's what I heard. I said, well, we looked at the numbers. The economy is doing great. Therefore, Joe Biden must be a great president. The numbers themselves become their own goal. And that is now the new belief system. And as long as that's the case, our leaders must have the mandate of heaven. America is great. Things have never been better. Even if we don't have $15 minimum wage and people don't have living wages and we're facing ecological ruin and they're suffering all around, it is a bizarre situation. And I could not agree with you more. That is the situation we find ourselves in.
Right. But how do we cut through this? And say, okay, we have to create a system in which we are meeting the goals that we set.
Right.
Honestly. Because what's happening now is that everyone says, oh, we are going to do the sustainable development goals, but they're only focusing on goal number 8, which is GDP growth.
Right.
And saying, okay, if we just grow the GDP, everything will automatically be met.
Right.
All the other goals will be met. And we know it's empirically, it's not true.
Right.
And we know that in systems, we know that just focusing on local optimization for one particular goal, which doesn't even happen to be, a tangible goal, in that sense that it's not really doing any good to me to just have some number grow on a computer. And instead of saying, the other goals are tangible goals, like zero hunger. That's a goal I can relate to, goal number 2. So I say, okay, if I were told to design a system that meets the zero hunger goal, I would say, okay, I have so much food. I have all these people sitting here. How do I move from here to there? This is not a complicated engineering problem. It's simple.
Right.
So, but the question is, do we I mean, we do engineering correctly when we are sending a spaceship to Mars.
Mm-hmm.
We do get the right people involved and who are actually trying to minimize resources, who are trying to figure out how to, for a given budget, how do we get the spaceship from here to Mars?
Right.
But when it comes to spaceship Earth, we seem to forget engineering, and we are sort of letting politicians and lawyers do engineering for us. You know what I mean? So it's sort of, to me, the entire, we have all this talent sitting on Earth, but they're busy sending ships to Mars instead of doing something for planet Earth.
I absolutely agree with you. And that goes to what I was trying to say at the beginning, where we have won all the debates. And related to that, we may get ourselves into a situation where we can't figure things out technically. I mean, as climate change truly becomes apocalyptic, that may occur. That is not where we are at now. We actually still have all the technical inventions that we need to invent. That doesn't mean we can't make solar power panels more efficient or windmills more efficient, but we can move to carbon neutrality tomorrow. That is not a technical, not tomorrow, but that is not, we could start. There's not nothing else has to be invented. There's not a technological problem that is preventing the change. One of the things I often try to critique is this idea, say in vitro meat, that there's something else we have to invent. And instead, I want to say, okay, we need to take a step back. Why is it that we are not listening to peer-reviewed science, that we are not listening to philosophical debates that have clearly been won, that we're not using the technological skills that we have? At least in terms of animals, there's at least two reasons that I've come across. And I understand you're asking larger questions about the environment and capitalism, and I think they may relate as well. But at least in terms of animals, there's at least two. One, peer pressure. So there is a small but growing and significant body of research that suggests the primary reason that more people do not go vegan or decrease their consumption of meat is because of stigma. They don't want to be made fun of. They don't want to feel as though they are weird. There is a myth that eating meat is human nature. It is not, as you know. India alone, somewhere between 20 to 31% of the population is strictly vegetarian, and 70% of the population consumes little to no meat, primarily seafood. I mean, that is 950 million people. Presumably, we all have this human nature. So if India can do it, why can't the rest of the world? So it is not human nature to eat meat, but it may well be human nature to want to fit in, to want to be like our fellow person. And if we actually read the books of why people say they eat meat, if you read Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan, the reason he gives, he's temporarily vegetarian and then he eats meat. And he says, the reason I did it is I felt weird being vegetarian. I felt alone. I felt like I couldn't break bread with other people, which is fascinating because most bread is vegan. You could break bread. But what they mean is, I couldn't eat with, there was a study done showing that, just for this study, that the most stigmatized group of everyone, so they say, rank people, more stigmatized than homosexuals, more stigmatized than atheists, more stigmatized than people in poverty, were vegans. The only group that was stigmatized more were active drug users. If they had gone to recovery, that was fine, but active drug was the only group that they liked less. Well, that's quite a lot to give up, And so peer pressure, and actually one other thing, so I was curious how many vegetarians or vegans there were, and it's bizarrely complicated to figure out. I actually took months studying. You would think this is something you can Google, and it is not. And what I found is that, the number is somewhere between 9 to 12%, but there is a large number of people who strictly follow a vegetarian or vegan diet who don't tell anyone. They're closet vegans. They keep it to themselves. And the reason is probably the stigma. They don't want people to make fun of them. Oh, sorry, I think I lost you there for a second again.
Can you?
I can hear you now.
Question, Rebecca. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Question from Rebecca Allen. Quite a few countries animal rights parties. Is that something you recommend? And is there a model that you recommend among animal rights parties?
So if we had a different system of governance, what we have is first past the post, winner take all. if we had something where coalition building of different parties was the way our government worked, then an animal rights party would be perfect. And it's usually the case in these other countries. Australia also has an animal rights party in first past the post, but most it's a coalition building. And so you have to pull people to that side. So if we had that system, yes. Since we have first past the post, an animal rights party is going to be a electoral irrelevancy. What we need to do is get political power within the Democratic Party. I wouldn't even say the Green Party. We have to get the Democratic Party, and we have to pool the Democratic Party to issues related to animal rights and make that the price of our support. Like, you want us to vote and contribute and go out. And to do that, here is our animal Bill of Rights. Here is what we need you to support to get our support and aid and money and turn us out of the polls. And we are a powerful, committed single issue that pulls the Democrat Party to these issues. Even if whoever the leader is doesn't care, they know they have to do that, because otherwise the coalition falls apart. That's what we have to do, I believe.
Right. That's exactly what the LGBT movement did, right? Basically.
It is what multiple social justice movements have done in the past, on the right and the left. We recently, to give the opposite example, we recently saw the Republicans continue to say that Trump somehow won the election and strip Liz Cheney of her post, and these are horrible things. And don't ask why, I was watching Fox News when they were interviewing the Republican leadership. Why are you stripping this from Liz Cheney? And they actually said, it is to keep the Trump voters in the coalition. We have to have these voters. He didn't even say it was true. He said, this is the price of what we have to do in order to win elections. That's what we have to make it. The price of what you have to do to win elections is have the Green New Deal include restrictions on meat. The Burgergate you brought up, make that not a joke, make that reality. Say, you have to do a host of things for animals and for the environment, and that is our price of admission.
Right. Yeah.
It's my belief, and it's something I already do. You know, I and everyone that I personally know, we are single issue candidates around the environment and around animal rights, even though we are broadly social justice issues in many other areas. But like, who we ultimately support in the primary, we'll vote for whoever wins the primary, is around those two issues. You have to support those two issues to get our vote, our money, our polling, whatever it is. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, we had another presidential candidate before who was probably a closet vegan, right? Dennis Kucinich.
Yeah, probably so. Yeah, and it's quite politically dangerous. I mean, you pay a huge, exactly what we're talking about, stigma, a huge cost to be, like you say, publicly vegan in the United States as a political leader. Yes.
I mean, in the BBC, I think we had on that study that we as reviled as drugs, right? And I think it was vegans were more reviled than anyone else.
Yes, vegan phobia is real and constant.
Ethical vegans. So yes. I saw that as a sign that I'm on the right path. Because if I'm well liked in the system, then I'm not doing the right thing. Because as a systems engineer, I know that basically we are creating a system. So we have to create a new system in which justice is normal. Social justice is normal. Right?
Yes. I apologize. Let me interrupt. I just so agree with you. Where it's like, look, we don't have to make everyone saints. I don't think that's going to happen. Right. What we have to do is change norms. Most people are going to do what is normal. Most people are going to do what seems socially acceptable. Those same people who are now so worried about being thought weird if they go vegetarian or vegan, if that becomes the norm, are exactly the same people who then would stop eating meat, even if they still personally want to eat meat because they don't want to be weird or abnormal. Right. And so we don't need to make saints. We have to get a small, committed minority to shift the norms. And then when these norms become the norm, everyone else follows. That's what every other social movement has done. And there are two important parts. One, that means you can have a lot of gain in a short period of time because you actually don't have to change everyone. You just have to change what's seen as the norm, because you're like, What do you mean we're losing? We're losing. Yes, until the norm changes. What you actually see a punctuated equilibrium, what you actually see in the study of social justice movements is they're losing until they win. It's an all or nothing thing. And so that's also what people don't seem to understand, where they're like, oh, we're totally losing. We need to give it all up. We need to do in vitro meat. It's like, no, the industries are incredibly fragile. And what social justice history of all social justice shows is that it is a huge change because it is the norm you have to change. And we just have to become the people that are so stubborn, that are so fanatical, that we won't change the norm. We force the norm to change because we're compromising society, and we force that kind of compromise and say, no, this is the new norm. Right. And law, and that's why I focus so much on law. What we also see is what law does is less any kind of enforcement one way or another, but it becomes a way of saying, this is what is now acceptable, socially acceptable. This is the way that is normal. And your heart and mind may not have changed, but you are now in the wrong because we as a society have agreed that this is the way things should be.
Right. So that's also a nonlinear feedback mechanism.
Exactly. Yeah. Punctuated labor is from evolution, where he thought evolution happened. It was like, well, why is there not half a wing? And it's like, no, the change happens all at once. That's right. Yes. So both the dangers, what happens with climate change, is nonlinear, but this change we see in social justice is almost always nonlinear. I can't think of one time where it's like, well, we just had this one and we had this small. It's like, no, because most of the people aren't good or bad. They're just nice. And so what you have to do is change the norm, and then they move with you in mass.
En masse, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, it was Susan Pitcairn had told me that in any species you have the outliers, the explorers who go out and try new things, and you have the conservatives who stick to what they know.
Right.
And you need both in any species for that species to be viable, because if the conservatives keep following the outliers, then they may die off because the outliers may be doing something stupid, So you need the mass for it to be there in a stable state so that the outliers can keep coming back. But when they try something new and it actually is better than where you're at, then eventually the outliers will pull the conservatives over.
You mentioned a great example that I've seen in my own life. And so I don't mean to compare one group with another. I think that's a bad thing that we do. That's not what I mean. So I mean this analogy only in the sense that social justice can work quickly. In my own life, the LGBTQ plus community, even though they do have massive stigma still, I also don't mean to apply that over, but it was so much worse when I was a child and I heard, or as an adolescent, and I heard people say things like, oh, well, we can only have domestic partnerships. Gay marriage is impossible. And somehow the impossible happened, and it happened quickly, and so we now see a lot of progress in a short period of time. There's more progress to do, but a lot of progress in a short period of time. And so I think people need to understand that same thing is wholly possible around animal rights, where we're being told, well, you have to compromise and you have to take all these things, which isn't what you want or you believe in, and you're a bad activist if you don't do this, if you don't say we need, which Matt Ball did. He said we should be arguing that people should eat cows instead of chicken. I was like, what? When you have to support humane meat. That's not what I believe. You have to support in vitro meat. That's not what you believe. And they'll say you're a bad activist, and say, no, you have it wrong. We have to be unreasonable. We have to fight for what you think is impossible. And often that is what shifts society. The unreasonable becomes the norm.
Absolutely. I cannot agree with you more. I mean, this is we should never compromise on those principles that we hold dear to us, and we know it's the truth. It makes no sense.
I've taught a class on animals virtually every academic year since I've been a professor, and I've tried different strategies. So I've tried like not saying I was vegan at the start or whatever. The only thing that works is saying day one, I'm vegan. Otherwise, they feel tricked or lied to. No, you're never going to trick someone into social justice. That is an absurd idea that keeps being, we want to go the path of trickery, these kinds of things, then I promise you the CAFOs will have a speed. They just have more money and more experience and less ethics. And so just trying to tell the truth, honestly, day one, works better with my students than anything else I have ever tried. Not that they all go vegan, but it works way better. Soul power, truth power. I mean, it is a rhetorical idea. You tell the truth, and there's a power to telling the truth. The emperor has no clothes, but a
Right.
9-year-old can understand that anyone can understand that they can spend all they want on marketing, and we still win because there is a power to truth. There just is. There just is.
Yes, that is justice.
Yes.
So there is one more question. Okay, there's one more question, but hold on a second, let me find it. Yeah, Michael Newnham is asking. So I see the animal agriculture industry mobilizing to cast doubt on their impact. Example, they use rainwater, methane has no impact, regenerative farming needs animals. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the recalibration of how to measure methane impact.
Yeah.
And so how can we counter this drive? Because there's all this psychops that they are bringing to try and confuse us.
Yes, they're getting quite serious about it. It started in the wake of Livestock Slang Shadow, and they saw the media and they became quite worried, and so they've been hiring people. That's when they started sort of funding these contrarian scientists that I mentioned. So, for example, Frank Mittenholiner, he has this nice German accent. He's not even trained as a climatologist, but he goes on the news all the time and basically explains why the animal agriculture isn't harmful. And the myths change. So you debunk one, and they've already moved on to the other. I think it was Burger King was like, we'll feed some type of alfalfa to the cows, and that will solve the problem. And then it's always based on some sort of bogus research. And so we do have to debunk that. That's something I spend a lot of my time doing. We do have to go through and explain why this is wrong. And regenerative farming or rotational grazing is one that we're starting to try to like work through now and have kind of like a set press release or web page. So each time one of these things comes out, we can point to it and take a look at it. But the other thing, though, is in a sense not to get too caught up, I think, an activist level of the drama, because they're going to keep changing. I started with critiquing locavorism. Well, most people don't even believe in locavorism, but they haven't even changed what they're doing. They're just changing the name. So Joel Salatin, who was the featured personality in Food Inc. and The Omnivore's Dilemma, originally called what he did being a local farmer, locavore, and then he called it grass-fed or free range, and was debunked. He's now moved on and said he's doing regenerative farming or rotational grazing. The farming hasn't changed. He just finds a new term, and when you go, well, here's all these studies debunking, he's like, no, what are you talking about? I'm now doing this other thing. And the kicker to all of this, he's just one example, but he's a famous example, and he himself is a climate change denier. He doesn't really let people know this, but he's avidly he posted on Facebook, he doesn't believe in human-caused climate change. So it's all nonsense anyways. He doesn't believe in rotational grazing is going to prevent climate change. He doesn't believe in climate change. It's a marketing tool for him to sell more meat. So yes, we have to debunk it and answer it. One thing I like is public debates. If you can get them to debate, you'll get more people to watch. Some people are like, I'm not going to watch the vegan, but if you watch the debate, and then you'll get both sides. And so I think, that's one way.
Yeah. I do have an open invitation to any climate scientist who disagrees with my data, because I published it now, and to have a public debate.
Yeah.
And then let's have it out. Let's talk about it.
Let's see. Right. If you know these things, I'm not scared. If you know all this, if you are going to embarrass me on the science, then let's look. Everyone watch. We can have an in-person moderator. People can make their own opinions. We can post these debates, and you can see both sides, and you can figure it out. And in my experience, this never goes well for the other side.
Yeah, I haven't had any takers so far. I'm still waiting. I'm looking at my email saying, because I created a separate email for that.
Yeah. It can also be good to make the challenge very public. So if they don't, add kind of a peer pressure, and people notice, wait a second, the very fact you won't even debate is itself, a kind of message. But
yeah, that's what happened with Goodland and Anand. I don't know if you know this. Goodland and Anand had a debate with the FAO scientists. I didn't know that. Okay.
But I didn't know they had this debate. Oh, okay. I'll have to look.
They had a debate with the FAO scientists in the Animal Feed Science and Technology Journal. And at the end, the editor asked the FAO scientists to continue the debate, and they declined to continue the debate. Okay, and at that point, I said, okay, you've lost. As
Right.
far as I'm concerned, Gudlan Anang is the established science, So that's when I started with that. This was back in 2012.
Yeah. But like I say, so kind of to put the two things together, it's good to debate, to expose it. But as I said, we've already won all the debates in reality.
Right.
And so then we have to start asking these deeper questions of how can we really change human behavior. And then that's what we have to organize and fight on. So let's keep debunking it, but not get tricked in thinking somehow that's really the issue, that someone's going out and eating a hamburger because they heard whatever, rotational grazing. That's never the real reason. That is always the bad faith excuse they're giving. Oh, I think you've frozen again.
Right. Well, for most of the time I was not frozen, so I'm glad. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you for your wisdom and your that you bring to the subject. It's very much this recording when it's done.
Well, thank you for having me on. Thank you for everything you are doing. To anyone who is listening, thank you for everything you are doing. And I really just want to end with a message that I genuinely believe of possibility and hope. The industry is scared. The reason they're spending so much money on this is they're scared. They wouldn't be doing it otherwise. It's actually very fragile. Yeah. And individual people, I think, are even scared. There's reason there's so much hostility to vegans on a personal level is at some level they know that these things could happen very quickly. So yes, thank you to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.